Welcome to the Inspired Conversations podcast, hosted by me, Andrea Cova-Bernal. As a college counselor, I'm inspired not only by the incredible students I work with, but also by remarkable change makers in higher education, each with powerful stories of their own. Through storytelling and shared narratives, I believe in the power of connection. Join me as we delve into dialogue and share valuable advice for college success. Welcome to the Inspired Conversations podcast, everyone. And I should say, welcome back, bienvenidos. Welcome to Hispanic Heritage Month. There's so much going on right now. I also have to say this is the last and final episode of this series, which I'm so excited about. I couldn't think of anybody better to round out this series than Jennifer, who I had the pleasure of meeting at one of your Latina grad events. And that was such an incredible networking opportunity, which I want to address in a little bit. But before we do, I just want to highlight what the podcast truly is all about and why we're here today. And when I started this podcast, my mission was to create a space for folks who are in higher education, who have a voice, who have created a voice for underrepresented people in this world. Because, I think a lot of times it's really hard to navigate our space, whether it's in undergraduate, master's programs, especially PhD programs. And I also know, especially in light of affirmative action and the new SCOTUS case, there are a lot of folks who feel a little bit voiceless in this process. So I wanted all our listeners, all students, to know that there are people in these spaces who support you, who have similar experiences and stories as you, who are allies, who want to, guide you every step of the way. So I started this podcast to create that space for you all as a resource, as a guide, so you can meet them one-on-one and interact with them. So welcome to the podcast today. If you're tuning in live, we're going to welcome questions a little bit later. For now, I want to introduce our awesome guest. Like I said, I couldn't think of anybody better to round out our season. So Jennifer, thank you. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Andrea. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Wonderful. I know. Thank you for taking so much time out of your busy PhD schedule, all of the work that you're doing and in light of your project and your proposals. So, but like I said, I couldn't think of a better way to talk about post-grad and PhD programs. For those folks who are tuned in, we will have some Q&A later. And before we get started, though, I also wanted to like I said, the power of this podcast is about storytelling. So we can't get to resources unless we know where it all began, right? And the resources that started for you. So Jennifer, I'd like to take a little bit of time to highlight your story. Can you tell us where you come from, where you grew up, a little bit about your Latina background, if you can, and then we'll go from there.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So I am a first-generation Latina. I'm the proud daughter and granddaughter of immigrants from Sinaloa, Mexico. And my culture has been a part of my identity for as long as I can remember. And I think that it's something that has really driven my goals, which we can get into after later when we talk about my research and all of that in my PhD program. But so I grew up the oldest daughter at home. So the eldest daughter with a little brother. So I am originally from Boyle Heights in Los Angeles. I went to high school there. And throughout high school, I had people similar to you who would expose me to the undergraduate career, right, to the four-year university pathway. And so they really encouraged me to pursue higher education. But it was the way they had framed it, right? The way they framed my journey and this like yellow brick road to follow. It ended with the four-year university. And so in my mind, that's all I knew. Like that's all I knew that existed.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was in high school, I was taking the AP classes. I was taking community college classes while I was in high school still. And once I graduated, I was accepted to a few Cal States. I was accepted to a few UCs here in California. I mostly applied to Southern California because I wanted to stay close to LA. And at that time, even though, the academic counselors guided me through the college application process, I still wasn't really sure how to select my school, right? And back then, the way that I chose my undergrad and the way I chose my grad program was very different. So
Mm.
my undergrad, I actually interned during my junior year in high school. I interned at a this nonprofit organization in downtown LA, which oversees all of the preschools in Los Angeles. And at the time, I would swear my life that I was going to be a preschool teacher. I really wanted to be a preschool teacher. I have no idea why, but I really wanted to be a preschool teacher. And so interning here, my internship roles were really to just kind of like be the assistant to the president of the company. And on occasions, she would take me to these super high-end professional networking events in downtown LA, where she would give speeches, right? And she would talk about the impact that the preschools were making on like these children and the communities and the resources for the families. And I was completely inspired, right? And I talked to her and I said, I think I want to go into preschool like a lot. So she was like, okay. She was like, I have great connects at the child development department at Cal State Northridge. And she was like, you should apply there. And so that was my junior year. So I did apply. And I feel like since having that conversation with her, because she became a role model for me during this like 3-month internship, it really guided my direction and it really narrowed down my focus on Cal State Northridge. I had no idea how far it was from home. I had no idea, really anything about the school other than according to this president of the company that I was interning for, the department was great and the department chair was great. And I went with it. And when I got accepted to, the UCs, the Cal States, and I saw the acceptance from Northridge, I said, this is it. Like, this is what I've been wanting my whole life.
Mm.
And I went with it. And so I remember my mom and me and my brother, we went to campus. The very first day I ever stepped foot or saw what the campus looked like was the day that I went to get my student ID.
Wow.
And my mom was like in love with it. She's like, it looks like a really nice neighborhood. It's clean. There's a lot of squirrels running around. And so, we were sold on the offer of going to undergrad. And luckily, I, applied to FAFSA and had tuition covered. And so the financial kind of expenses were also not something that I really thought about at the time because of my parents' income. I qualified for that. And so my tuition was all covered for, my expenses were covered for. And at the time, as an undergrad, right, first generation, I and my family were so proud, right? We're like, this is a huge accomplishment. And I started off commuting, and commuting on its own was a
Mhm.
monster to tackle every day, especially in LA. Going north from LA was terrible.
Yeah,
And
from
so
Royal Heights too. Oh my gosh.
yeah, yeah. And I had 8 a.m. classes, so I had to leave like at 6 a.m. It was terrible. I was not a fan. So I did it for 2 years. And at the second year mark, for the 2 years, I was just going to school, taking classes, um, coming home, doing my homework, going back to classes. And I would look around me and I would see the sororities, the fraternities, the clubs, the different like organizations on campus. And I felt like I wasn't a college student. Like I wasn't living the college student life that I would see like on the movies or hear even my classmates talk about. And I spoke to my parents and I said, you know what? I think that I need to get more involved in school. And I think that to do that, I have to move to Northridge. And they were super supportive. I remember, they were like, okay, let's look for apartments. And we looked for apartments outside of school, outside of campus, and we found one. And it was perfect. To this day, I am so grateful for that landlord and the roommates that I had. And it was a really nice experience. And it was very rewarding to have lived there for my last 2 years of undergrad, because it opened so many doors for me to just be closer to campus. I started working in the department office. I was involved in so many projects in the department. I worked with so many faculty. I got close to a lot of faculty. I even ended up at like one of their faculty dinners, like at one of the faculty houses one year for like the holiday get together, right? And it was just so much fun. And that really immersed me into the faculty world, if you will. And it really like motivated me. And I started seeing like, you know what? I think this is what I want to do. Like, I don't think it's the preschool kids. I think it's the like young adults that I want to help and I want to teach and I want to guide and I want to mentor and advise them. And so I got closer and closer to my faculty. I started TAing, I started being a research assistant, and all of that without me knowing was, developing my identity or developing my competitiveness to what then came senior year. And my department chair asked me like, hey, what grad program are you going to apply to? And I was like, well, I'm not going to apply to a grad program, sir, because I'm ready. Like, I'm ready to go to teach. And he was like, no, you're not. Like, you need to have a master's or a PhD. And so I remember at this point, I was, kind of like frustrated, right? Because I was like, I didn't even know this existed. Like, why hadn't I been preparing for this earlier? And so luckily, because of all my experience that I, not known to my knowledge, this all counted. And so I did prepare for grad school that year, but it was very last minute. And at the time, the GRE, which is a graduate entrance exam, it was heavily valued in grad school applications.
Yes.
And so, now post-pandemic, it's a little bit more flexible, but back then it was still a really big chunk of your application to grad school. And so I prepared for it. I had 2 weeks. People prepare for this exam with months in advance. And so I prepared in 2 weeks. I took it. I didn't do that well. Unsurprisingly, because I didn't do well in the math part, and I've never felt competent in math. And so I was still encouraged by my mentors to apply. And at this time, I was really relying heavy on my mentors, and anything they told me were the rules in life for me because, my parents had no experience. I didn't have any older siblings, older cousins. And so my mentors in undergrad have really been the ones like paving the way for me. And so I remember them, telling me, just apply anyway. You're really competitive in other ways. Like you have all this experience and your grades will reflect that. And you have conference presentations and our letters are going to be so strong. And I was like, okay, so I'm going to apply. So I applied to one program where most of my faculty had been graduates of that program. And I got waitlisted. And then I didn't get accepted. And it was disappointing. It was disappointing, but I also felt like the whole process was rushed. Like I felt like, okay, I applied good, but then when I didn't get accepted, it didn't feel as bad as a failure because I thought like, well, maybe it's like good, like maybe I wasn't even ready for that in the first place. Um, and so then it resulted in a gap year. And during that gap year, I went back home. I moved back home. So I graduated. I moved back home to East LA, well, Boyle Heights, and I enrolled at East LA College. And it was my first time ever at a community college. And I absolutely loved it. I still to this day contemplate teaching at a community college because of the student population. I just thought they're like something that I value a lot in teaching is the mentorship. And I feel like I saw that a lot at the community college level. I was TAing again at the community college level. I founded a club. I had this mentality of like, I have to keep doing things. So I was taking classes. I worked on campus. I was just keeping myself busy as I continued to prepare for our next round of grad school applications. And during this time, like, I felt like, it was a good time for me to continue to grow my CV, number one, because that's so valued in academia to have a strong CV. But also, I was back home and I was spending time with my family again. And I think something that maybe we don't, I mean, we talk about it, I think, when we talk about like our experiences as first generation students, but it's like this, I felt personally like a shift in my connection to my family once I came back. And I just felt like it wasn't the same. And so I feel like that influenced, well, I mean, like I said, my culture is very, very important to me. And so my identity as a first generation, my identity as a Mexicana has always been super important to me. And so I felt like this time was a time for me to really reconnect with my family, to reconnect with, my culture, to reconnect with Boyle Heights, to reconnect with just who I was from the beginning. And so I did that. And it really gave me, a spark of motivation, encouragement, really gave me a drive. And it's really the root of, my research now. And when I did apply back to grad school, I got in and I got into 2 programs. And at this point, the decision was down to funding. It was down to who's going to give me more money, so I can afford to go, and proximity to home, because I didn't want to leave. And so one of them was in Wisconsin, and the other
Ah,
program was here still in Southern California.
I
And so
see.
I, naturally opted for Southern California in Orange County, and it's been a really good experience. I did switch programs, so we can also talk about that, but I did make the switch from an education PhD to a sociology PhD, which at the time felt like a very confusing, frustrating, once again relying on my undergrad mentors, type of step and move in my life. But now I look back and I thank everyone who told me to do it, because I feel like it really reignited who I'm meant to be and who I'm meant to, develop into becoming. So
Mhm.
I think that there's a lot of challenges, or a lot of times throughout my journey where I felt like, I didn't know that. It would have been nice to know that.
Always. I always say that if only I knew then what I know now, as a counselor and educator, but always, we're learning in this process.
Yeah. So that also has sparked, a lot of who I am today, and the platform that I have and the research that I do. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
that's kind
I
of
cannot wait to get into that research. And oh my gosh, there's so much to unpack there. But I have to say, Jennifer, I can resonate so much with everything, most of what you said, and hopefully some of the audience can as well. And some of the things that I just want to unpack, throughout your journey, all I could hear was network, 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 like the
oh
power
yeah.
of mentorship. And I know we hear this all the time as students in academia, like, and that quote, your network is your net worth. We say it a lot in our world. You have to know people and be confident asking for help in those mentors, because along the way, you said it, things are going to change. You may get those rejections. I tell students all the time, you might get a lot of no's before you get that one yes, that one open door that makes sense. And at the end of the day, that is what's going to make sense for you. It's sort of the path and journey that it's brought you to.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
I can't emphasize enough that, and I think that's been a streamlined, a constant theme in all of my podcast interviews is actually how impactful and powerful your network can truly be, and so that's super important. But like I said, things truly change. And I'd say, I work with high school and college students, and 9 times out of 10, the student will go in thinking they want to major in one thing or study one thing. Just like you, I was a preschool and elementary school teacher. I taught first and kindergarten for 2 years, and now I'm working as a college access counselor. You learn through this process where your niche is and your passion becomes. And so I encourage students, especially if you're debating on graduate school, debating on college in general, thinking about where your space is in all of this, to be completely open-minded to that change and welcome it,
Mhm.
right? And then one last thing that you mentioned is this, and this, the reason I called your podcast today, the power of representation, is because I think a lot of times, me in particular, can feel very isolated in my spaces. And I feel a lot of times, especially, I'm constantly having to defend my Latinidad and my space because I don't look like a typical, Latina, I guess. A lot of people think I'm Indian or come from a different culture. I'm actually Venezuelan, New Mexican, and I've got tons of Native American roots in between. And I just feel like I'm constantly having to defend who I am in multiple spaces and, my quality of education and the way that I teach. And so I wanted to ask you along the way, Jennifer, in all of these spaces, from Northridge to East LA to your UC program, have you ever felt that way? And what advice would you give somebody who's just feeling the other in any of these spaces?
Yeah, no, and it's a really good point. And I didn't feel that way until grad school. Um,
Mm,
and if you go into the research on like lack of representation, like it's an undergrad, it exists, but I just didn't feel it at Cal State Northridge. And I still teach there. Like I mean, I teach there now for that reason, because I absolutely love the campus. I love the diversity of faculty. I love the diversity of the students. Um, and so I never felt that lack of, fitting in, or questioning who I was, questioning the importance of my culture. Um, and it wasn't until I came to grad school in my original first program that I really saw the difference. And it wasn't just a difference in appearance, it was a difference in there was still Latinas, and there was still Latinas who had a lot of resources, and there was still Latinas
Mm-hmm.
who, grew up in environments and neighborhoods that granted them the ability to, on paper, still, you know, how do I say it? Like, to me, it felt like are we like, do we have the same experiences? Like, can we even relate, at a level where like you understand what I went through and I can understand what you've been through?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's also those shifts. I think there's those power dynamics even within, being Latina, and it just comes down to like our neighborhood resources and the systems that we, are integrated in the educational systems that we come out of and go into. And so I started seeing those differences in dynamic, not just between me and like my white counterparts, or, especially males, um,
Mm-hmm.
but also with other Latinas. And I think that it really opened my eyes to question, like, who am I? And, what is it that I'm gonna be here to show people that I am? And one of the things that I remember my first year, when we do introductions, right, and we do icebreakers, and you get to know your cohort. And I remember saying, I am from Boyle Heights, and one guy specifically, he like gasped, right, and he was like,
Gosh.
oh my God, like, you were raised there? And I was like, yeah.
Wow.
And I love it. And so it was just, getting used to these type of comments that were like derogatory comments at times, or like comments that maybe not purposefully were made to make me feel less, but subtly did.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I've all through grad school, like I just learned, and perhaps it's my research again, perhaps it's just the fact that I am like obsessed with increasing the number of Latinas in graduate education, that I'm like, dude, you don't intimidate me. Like, I am not afraid of you. I am not intimidated by you. Um,
Mm-hmm.
when we were in grad school, in my grad program, my first and second year, I remember, I had in-person classes, and I would show up to in-person, right? And something that people talk about are like, oh, you have to treat it like a job, and you have to dress nicely, and you have to dress up and professional. And I had 8 a.m. classes, and I was not going to dress up. So I would come in like athleisure or sweats. And one of these times I did, as I would always, and a white male, made a comment as he was wearing sweats and a t-shirt that, like, did you really come to class dressed like that? And I was like, sir, did you? Because I
Yeah.
think we're
Wow.
wearing like the same thing.
Yeah.
And I remember, like, it just got to that point where I was like, you're gonna make a comment, I'm gonna make a comment right back, because you're not gonna do that to me. And so even when they would make comments in class, I was just like, I cannot hide my facial expressions. And so I would just look at my peers like, did they really just say this right now? And so that's kind of how I navigated it. Like, I've always been true to who I am. I've always been, you know, like, really just myself in any of these spaces, even in conferences. Because I feel like that's what attracts people to you, right? Like, I feel like the authenticity of it all, like your personality, is really what's gonna add like the passion to what it is that you're doing, and even further expand those networks that we're talking about, and how important those are as well, and the community that you get to grow because of being
Yes.
just yourself.
I love that. And you know what? I will say that's one thing about you when I first met you was you show up totally authentic in every space that I've seen you in. And I admire that. Right. And I think as educators, that for students who are coming into these spaces as first gen, brand new, it's so great to see that and understand, you know what, I can show up who I am and where I'm at and be powerful, be proud of all of that. And
Mhm.
one thing you sort of made me think of is I went to a PWI, a predominantly white institution, a small liberal arts college here in Los Angeles. And a lot of the students I work with also attend PWIs. And a lot of times when they're deciding where to go, excuse me, the first thing that they say is, well, there's too many white people there. There's too many people, like there's not enough people like me who I see. And my response is always like, that's exactly why you should be there. You got into this institution. You deserve your spot just like everybody else. You belong. But at the same time, I think in students' heads, it's like, no, I don't see enough people like me. I want to be around my people. That's going to make me feel a lot more confident. Where it's like, you know what, we need you guys in these spaces. That's the only way that it's going to build out representation, and support the next generation who feels like I can't go there because I don't see people like me, and so I've seen that as a common trend. So, if you're listening today, it's those two things. It's showing up authentically in the spaces that you are 100%. And then two, just knowing that you belong, whether you're the only one there, or whether you're one of few, you're building the next generation of spaces for these people. Yeah. And so that brings me to a little bit of your why, right? You had this journey through college and you had this journey through your undergrad and higher education experience, but you decided that there was more to be done. And you said it, you have a passion for showcasing more Latinas in this world. So how did that come about? And what have you done with that, that research and that space so far in Academic Latina?
Yeah. So really quick though, before we get into that, because
Yeah.
it's important, it's relevant. But I really like your comment, of addressing this idea of like you still have to show up. So recently I was a keynote speaker at the Latinx graduation, right, on my campus.
Mm.
And I was sitting on the stage with faculty, one of faculty who I had taken a class with, and I was looking in the auditorium, right? It was packed. Like there was so many families and students got like 10 tickets per student, and there was a lot of people. And it was nice to be in that space, right? And I asked my peer, my colleague, and I'm like, would you like still, do you think these students are still going to go to like the main graduation, like the overall graduation, or are they just going to come to this one? And when I asked that question in my head, I put myself in their shoes and I said, I wouldn't care to go to the big one, because this is where my family is, this is where my family understands, because we're speaking Spanish. Like this is where they feel welcome and accepted, and this is the space that I would want them to be in, right? And she said, oh no, absolutely, they should go to the larger one. And I was like, why? Like they're getting to hear. And she was like, no, because this is exactly why then we say things like, oh, Latinos are so underrepresented in higher education because they don't see us on stage, because they don't see us walk that stage. She's like, so yes, go to the Latinx one and enjoy and live that moment, but then also show up and be the representation that we need in the larger space as well. And I was shook. Like I had never thought about it that way, but it just gave me a whole new perspective, right? And it adds to what you just said. But I just wanted to say that really quick.
Yeah, no, it's again, it's powerful. It's showing up authentically, proudly, and knowing you belong. Like the biggest message there.
Yeah. Yeah. And so my why, right? When I was when I made the switch from programs, right? I made the switch in I think 2020. And at the time I really felt like a PhD wasn't for me because the research was hard, the statistics classes were hard, it was a lot of reading, it was a lot of writing. And I just feel like I just want to teach. I just want to teach and I want to mentor students. I don't want to do the research. I don't want to do all this, jargony stuff that goes on. And I started really questioning, like, is this what I want to do? And so one of my advisors, she said, you know what? It's the program. Like it's hands down the program. The curriculum per program is going to vary. And it's just this program that is not working out for you. But she said, I believe in you and you are so smart and you're so dedicated and you have a lot to offer. So let's just look for other programs. And I said, okay. So then I reapplied, and in the process of reapplying, I still had to keep up with my other program. And one of the milestones that I had there was I had to do a research project. And I was trying to find a way, right, to enjoy this project. And I thought of what about interviewing Latinas? Because I had just learned about interviews and the importance of interviews in research. And I thought, I'm just going to interview Latinas and I'm going to talk to them about their journees and I'm going to hear about what they struggle with. And I absolutely fell in love with research at that point.
Mhm.
Um, and so I came into my program, with that foundation of I absolutely love hearing their stories. I love the stories that they have to tell. I love, listening to how they have overcame all of the challenges that were thrown at in higher education. And it gave me this sense of like autonomy once again. And it was just, I also developed a bunch of friendships from those interviews. Um, and it's also how Academic Latina came about, because I realized the importance of having these spaces, these resources, this knowledge of the hidden curriculum that we're not told, right? But we're expected to know somehow how to navigate academia. And so it's just this historical, unfortunately, thing where as Latino and Latinx first generation college students, we're forced to navigate these educational institutions, but they often lack the proper resources to enable our successes. More than half of the time they lack these resources. And Latinx children of immigrants are one of the fastest growing segments of the US youth population. Yet we face a bunch of barriers, right, in higher education. And for me, what stood out was the doctorate, because I was at the doctorate level when I was doing this research. And I found that as of 2021, right, just 2 years ago, only 9.9% of Latinas completed a doctoral degree in comparison to 61.4% of white, right? And then African Americans 11.6, Asian 13.2. So 9.9, we are the lowest. And so I started looking, beyond my interviews and looking at the research and looking at the published literature. And a lot of this was due to poor academic preparation, right? Our undergraduates just didn't prepare as well enough, lack of mentorship, financial insecurity, negative hostile climates on campus, lack of sense of belonging, which when we come as underrepresented into these white spaces, you're bound to have a lack of sense of belonging, lack of representation, not just among students, but amongst faculty.
Mhm.
And, all these like non-inclusive campus climates that don't take into account our ethnic origins, that lead to discrimination, that lead to subtle, forms of microaggressions. And so from there, I really felt like, what can I do to add my little grain of salt to change this? And like I said, that's where Academic Latina came about, and that is what my dissertation focuses on. My dissertation will study this space as a space of support for Latinas, because I see it there. I get the DMs, I see the comments, I see the engagement in the profile of, wow,
Mhm.
this is so relatable. Oh my gosh, I am crying right now hearing your story, because I've been through that, or DMs of, hey, I really want to apply to a PhD. I'm an undergrad. Where do I start? I have my personal statement. Can you look at it? Right. And all these questions that I never thought of in undergrad, but, having these spaces online, also on Instagram for that matter, right? The fastest growing social media platform, it's really, growing, and the outreach, the potential outreach that it has is huge. And
Yep.
I feel like if you're going to be on Instagram scrolling already, if you're going to, getting the academic content, then that's even better, because you're also learning as you're, doing your social media hours of scrolling. So I guess I found this, little, I don't know, crack in the system to go into and be like, you know what, institutions, you're great and you try your best, but we need something outside of you, right? We need something outside of you that's going to be accepting, that's going to be welcoming, that's going to, be authentic, and, value our culture and value our identities, and value our roles as, first generation, sometimes the eldest daughters, daughters of immigrants. And so I felt like what I did and what I'm doing is making an impact. It's not as big as I would want it to be yet, but I know it's making an impact, and I know that it has what it needs to like be something bigger. And I hope that it does become bigger, and I hope that I can, continue to carry this on once I graduate, once I'm a professor, and continue to share those resources, continue to break down our cultural norms, the traditional norms of like marriage, kids. Like women now, we want to have independence, and we want to have careers, and we want to, have a voice at the table. And so I feel like I want to continue to be that person, to be that role model, to be that guide for other Latinas after me.
Yeah, it's so powerful. And first of all, I have to commend you because you have created something big, right? So I want you to own that and know that, because I wouldn't have, found you had you not brought a group of Latinas together for a lunch to just share our higher ed experiences,
Mhm.
And again, speaking of networks, speaking of the power of being around a table and storytelling, you said it. I think that this is why I started this podcast, because along the way, I actually started a podcast in 2020 called the College Match Podcast, where I was highlighting my student stories. And I'm hearing they're just powerful journeys from Uzbekistan and Mexico and El Salvador and going to these higher colleges. And I'm like, y'all, your stories are so incredible.
Mhm.
But in addition to that, along the way, I was meeting folks like you, where I was meeting admissions officers at some of these Yales and Ivy League colleges who are like, I am a first gen student myself, and here I am. I want to see you all here, And so this is why I created this space. So you said like the power of storytelling and narratives, shared experiences, I think is really why we're here, and growing with each other and for each other. And that's what you've created with Academic Latina. So I have to ask you, let's jump into your research, because we have some guests here who also have some questions for you. I want to give them the opportunity to ask that. But right now, you mentioned it a little bit, what your research is all about, but where are you at now with your PhD program, and what's next with Academic Latina?
Yeah, so I'm currently at the stage of defending my dissertation. So in a PhD program, your dissertation is the baby of it all, right? It's what blooms at the end and what really tells them you've done it, great, congratulations, you're a doctora. And so I'm in the process of proposing my project. And again, like I said, my project is really gonna be about interviewing Latinas who follow this space, interviewing Latinas who have been there and who watch my journey, and figuring out like how does this compare to the type of community or lack of that you have on your campuses, right? Because you touched something earlier, Andrea, about PWIs, right? And I'm at a HSI, right? A Hispanic Serving Institution. And even then I felt out of place,
Mm,
and I feel like sometimes these institutions brag about their labels, right? And they're like, oh my gosh, yes, we're HSIs and we serve the Hispanic. Like, no,
oh,
you don't.
mm-hmm.
Because we know that these labels are really just on numbers, right? Numbers of admittance of how many Latinos attend the campus. And it really comes down to like, how are you really serving them? And so that's what I'm interested in. I really want to know the power of a social media platform to, demystify that grad school experience and to guide you and to mentor you and to, pave the way for you in opposition or in addition, maybe even to like what your institution itself can do for you. Or like I said, or lack thereof. So that's really what I'm interested in seeing. And I think that it's gonna be, it's really gonna add to the purpose and the mission and acknowledging the impact that these spaces are doing, because I can see it, but I need the world to see this, and I need institutions to see that they need to do better, right?
Yes.
um
And
and that's the whole purpose of it. I think that in grad school, in academia, right? Academia, it's the politics of it all, or there has to be research done on it. We need to see numbers that prove it. And I'm going to give them these numbers and I'm going to prove it to them and I'm going to tell them this is what we need to do, because you guys, I don't know, like how do we make it clearer for you to understand, that these students need support and we need to keep valuing and their cultures and this deficit notion of you can't because you're Latino and your parents didn't go to higher education. Like, okay, they didn't, but we still have so many other cultural values that empower us and that have gotten us to this place where we are now, ready to succeed, ready to move on to the next stage in life. And so
mm-hmm.
it's just going to be a lot of finding out the impact of this space overall.
Yeah. Yeah. And before we get in, you just mentioned, before we get into questions, you mentioned one thing that actually really jumped at me. And I work for a nonprofit that specifically supports first generation students into these spaces, into higher ed. And one time we had an actual college, I'll never forget this, say, well, we really count on you guys to be that support, to be that bridge for them when they're struggling on our campuses. And we all looked at each other and we were like, well, we're getting them to your campuses, like now it's your job to take them under your wing and make sure they're becoming the citizens you promised they would become, And so I think a lot of these colleges are looking at us, nonprofits, at folks like you, these people who are, creating these spaces for them initially to continue being that bridge when we're like, no, we're getting them there. Now it's up to you guys to make it happen. And they just are not getting that. So thank you for all of your research in this world because it's so needed. Whether it goes, I hope and I pray that it goes as far as it possibly can. But no matter what it does, just know you have the support from all of us saying that this is, and as advocates saying this is important. So I want to jump in. I'm super excited by this because we've got some great questions from students who are all at all levels right now. And I want to give the floor to them. But before we do, I'm just going to give them a little opportunity. So if you're in the audience, you can either pose it in the chat box or I will call on you and you can unmute. But there was a question here. About, let's see, the dissertation process. And I think it's important. The question is the dissertation process can be very isolating. We talked about this a little bit. What's your advice on how to stay motivated to work on that dissertation while juggling so many other responsibilities, which I'm sure you can definitely relate to?
Yeah. I think something that has worked for me is having a writing group. And not a large writing group, because I have been part of large writing groups. And by large, I mean, I don't know, 10, 15 people. But when it's a large space like that, it kind of feels seminarish, right? And it feels like this, I don't know. I personally didn't enjoy being in those writing groups. I tried them a couple times. But for me, I have a colleague who's at the same stage as I, right? Aide, and she is at a completely different institution. She's in Chicago. We've met in person like once or twice. We met on social media. Again, the power of social media. And we're at the same stage of we defended our dissertation. Now we're working, on edits and getting the institutional review board at our institutions to approve of it, right? The ethics of our research. And we meet every week. And for the first like half hour of our 2-hour meetings, we just catch up. And hey, how was your meeting with your advisor from last week? What did they say about this? Oh, how are your questions going? Do you want me to look over your questions? And it's just like a bunch of like going back and forth. And we'll have a meeting the next day with our advisor, and then we text each other and we're like, hey, it went really good. Like I was so nervous, but it actually like it was great. Or you know what? I'm crying right now and I just need to like vent. And so having her there has been super helpful. And, I feel like I would have had that in my other program as well at the dissertation stage, because I had Latina peers who, I was really close to, and they've already graduated and they have their doctorate, and I'm so proud of them. But I never imagined that, I would have, first of all, somebody outside of my institution, outside of my program. And again, the power of networking, right? The power of like maintaining these relationships and friendships in academia. And so that has really helped me stay on top of it. So we do like a little check-in half hour, and then the rest of the hour and a half, we're doing like 30-minute periods of work. We, turn our camera off for 30 minutes, get some work done, check in for another 10, 15 minutes. Like, how was it? How'd it go? Do you want me to help you with anything? Do you have any questions? Okay, see you in another 30 minutes, right? And so we do that on and off for like I said, for 2 hours every week. And it's really helpful to keep you accountable, to have that. And I think that my advisor may have tried to like, hey, we should meet weekly, but I think the power dynamic is there of like, you're my faculty and it's kind of intimidating, and I'm a little nervous, and it has to be for perfect, and it has to be professional in these meetings. And so with a colleague that's at my level of learning, and as a grad student herself, it just gives me that comfortability of just being, I don't know, like vulnerable in a way as well throughout the whole progress, because it's really challenging, and I'm just at the start of it, and I already feel like it's going to be a huge challenge to overcome. But
Yeah.
having somebody there has been really helpful.
I love that. It's all about allies, and create. I like to call it your team, your board of directors. Start gathering those people in your life that they're not only going to be here for your dissertation piece, but now you're going to see they're going to be there the rest of this experience, right into your adulthood. So, yeah, definitely start building that. And Gracia, you actually had a really great question that was posed that's actually very related. Speaking of isolation and the challenge, do you feel comfortable unmuting yourself and asking that question? If not, I can ask it for you.
I don't remember what my question was.
That's okay. I will definitely say it. It is actually about self-care. So, self-care practice tips, do you have any advice around that? Again, I like the idea of meeting in groups and finding your allies, but self-care is so important. Thank you, Gracia, for posing that in
For
your
me,
SVP.
yeah, I agree. I think self-care is really important. My first, so throughout your graduate school program, whether this is a master's or a PhD or, an EDD or whatever you decide to pursue, graduate school is you're going to go through these like periods of time where for, a year, maybe it's going to be heavily focused on courses. Another few months is going to be focused on another milestone. And so these different milestones of different programs, I think for me have led to different forms of self-care.
Hmm.
And so in the beginning, like the first 2 years when I was just taking courses and, yes, they were intense, but I had this mindset of they are not going to dictate my life because this is just, my job to be a grad student. And so I would strictly take the weekends off. Perhaps on Sunday nights, I would, prep for the week and like, just have everything in my calendar ready, look at what the week would look like, anything that I had to get, printed out or whatever. But I strictly had like my weekends are off. Like I'm going to visit my family on the weekends. I'm not taking my laptop. I'm not checking my emails.
Mm.
And like I said, this varied because when I was doing milestones that, my advisor would say, hey, I need you to turn this around, I would send her a draft and then she send it back with edits. And she said, the turnaround is like 24 hours, Jennifer, you have to keep moving. And so, if it was on the weekend, then I had to get to that email and I had to address that. But if there was nothing of urgent matter, then I would make sure to have those weekends off. And again, it was just spending time with family. And that for me meant driving an hour away from where I go to school. So that in itself was just getting away from the environment, getting away from campus, helped a lot. And I think now my self-care has looked a lot as fitnessy, right? Fitness surrounded of like the gym. And I feel like when I was considering the gym, I would see all these videos on TikTok. My For You page was filled with you know girls who are there to like build muscle and work out and look good. And yes, that is part of the goal, but I feel like when I approach the gym as like I'm just going to go for a walk on the treadmill for like 30 minutes, I'm going to take my book and I'm going to read, or I'm going to take a class at the gym, like making it more of like a fun rather than I need to count like what I'm eating and I need to be,
Mm.
it wasn't fun for me.
Yeah.
And maybe it could have gotten to that if I would have continued, but I just feel like that has never been fun for me. And it makes it like I have to do this because I have to reach that goal of like losing that amount of weight, of like getting this physique. And so I just, I felt like, what, if I'm going to go to the gym, is because I just want to like clear my mind, right? I just don't want to think about this. I want to stare at the screens without audio, read the subtitles on a show
Yeah.
at
Mindless workout. Yeah.
yeah, and just enjoy being there. Or just going on a walk outdoors with my headphones, listening to music. And I personally find that my self-care is older music. So this weekend I went with my friend, we went on a painting date to the park, and I was playing Shakira and like 2007 and that those songs. And she got in my car and she was like, what are you listening to? And I was like, I don't know, it brings me
Old school.
peace. Like yeah, it makes me happy. Like these songs that I grew up listening to my mom playing, and the old music is what really it just feels like it gives me a sense of home, and it gives me a sense of like how easy life was before undergrad and grad school.
Yeah.
Um, so that feeling is really what I attach myself to.
I love that. And actually, you just really quick and to that point, the last interview I did, one of the suggestions she made was creating playlists of the different emotions and experiences you're sort of going through. So like the work playlist, the one where you just got to get stuff done, but the playlist that's also going to be your like fun, old school, that's going to like reground me playlist. And, that's sort of a part of therapy and self-care. And, and I loved that idea for everyone, even adults, to take advantage of.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is the last question. And if you feel comfortable, Patricia, this is a little change of pace, but this is actually helpful for me because, as I told you, I would love to consider a PhD program in the future. Patricia, do you feel comfortable unmuting yourself and asking your question about the curricula? I don't know if she's there. I'll go ahead and ask it for her. I'm curious about the difference between the curriculum that's covered in a PhD versus an undergrad in sociology. And so thinking about the differences in what you're learning, and that's probably a lot to unpack, but do you have a sort of a quick response for that?
Yeah, so I think it's not going to be an accurate response because I didn't do my undergrad in sociology. So I have my undergrad in child development with a minor in psychology. And then I have my master's in education. And now I have my PhD in sociology. And so, however, I will differentiate between the undergrad and PhD just experience overall. Um, of like a huge difference is the amount of work, right? And the style of courses. So in undergrad, it's very the class structure is where you have a teacher, right, a professor, and you have a bunch of students, right? And that's just the ratio. In grad school, you're taking these courses where you are assigned to do readings and you're assigned to, look into articles. And then you're going to come into this classroom of like 10, 15, 20 at most people, and you're all going to have something to say. And they're going to ask you, and they're going to go around the room, and you are I don't want to use the word force, but you have to provide something, right? And so this kind of like then encourages you and should really, guide you in the direction of taking courses that you are, attracted to, that you want to learn about, things that you want to read about. Because a lot of the courses in grad school are framed that way. They're not my favorite, where you have to discuss. And sometimes, these courses are designed where every week a different student or group of students leads a different book for that week, right? And they lead discussion and they ask the questions, and the faculties just are kind of like as assistants and guidance. And because it's also preparing you, right? A grad program is really preparing you for your professional career, and it's giving you this professional development. And part of that is being able to do public speaking and presentations and articulate your ideas and stand by them, right? Because you can say like, well, I think, and then somebody else can say, well, I think. And you have to stand by what you're saying, especially when it's your research and what you're passionate about. So that's really the training and the kind of like discussion and interactions that you have in graduate school, which I think are completely different from undergrad, where you're just kind of like the receiver of the knowledge. And now your job is to, yes, you're receiving the knowledge, but how are you interpreting it, and how are you understanding what it is that you're learning? And that's like the challenging part of it. That's the part that's really going to get you thinking and get that ball rolling for you.
Super helpful. I definitely see the dynamic and the difference in the types of, systems, the types of education. I think that's a beautiful way to sort of end. The last question though that I have for you, Jennifer, because it's really hard to end this conversation. I feel like we can go on for days to support and add more context of how to master the graduate and PhD programs. But if I'm a first generation student tuning in today, I don't know where my journey is going to take me. What are three last pieces of advice you would give those students as they sort of navigate this world?
I think that, and something that came about in our conversation was the importance of expanding our networks and taking classes in other departments and interacting with students from other departments, with faculty from other departments, getting as much experience as you can with different interdisciplinary fields of study that'll make you, perhaps not an expert, but give you intel into other fields and how you can intertwine them to like strengthen your identity in the future. And I think that, one thing that I always hear undergrads say is like, well, I want to go to grad school, but I don't have research experience. My research experience in undergrad was volunteering at a children's center to take care of kids while their moms were getting interviewed. That was my research experience. And eventually, you know, by volunteering, taking care of these kids, and it was just something that the faculty just asked in the department, like, I need students who can help me with, because these moms, I need them to get interviewed and they don't have time because of their kids and so and so. So I was like, I can do it. And so being in this space with her, it eventually led to, hey, Jennifer, can you help me translate during this meeting? And I said, sure, I can translate. And then she was like, you know, you've been participating and we want to make you an author in our paper. And I was, you know, I was like, whoa, like, okay, that's amazing. So, you know, starting with these small volunteer experiences with faculty in their labs, whether it's, you know, I don't know, like gathering their data or like assisting them during their research while they're wearing the white lab coat and, you know, doing the interview, like you're still immersing yourself in that environment. So expanding your network in that sense, that's one thing that I would say. And then I would also say to be kind to yourself, because when I took that gap year, sure, I wasn't 100% disappointed, but I was also frustrated. I was frustrated and I said, well, you know, my high school to undergrad was so smooth. Why can't my undergrad to grad school have been that way? You know, why didn't I get prepared the same way that I did in high school? And I felt like these bumps and these obstacles really led to me, you know, at times feeling like I should have done better. I should have known that. And my piece of advice to that is just to be kind to yourself, because as first generations, we're experiencing hitting the highs and hitting the lows constantly. And this roller coaster, it's like kind of never ending. And sometimes the highs go on for a long time, right?
Mhm.
But you need to like celebrate the highs as much as you delve into like the sadness and the disappointment and the frustration of the lows, right? Because sometimes we focus too much on the lows where I can spend days crying over a failure, right? Over a paper being rejected, over something not that happening the way I was expecting it to. And then I get a high and I'm like, oh, cool, like nice. And it's like, no, you passed that. You did really good. The paper looks good. You know, you got a good grade. And so celebrating and being kind to yourself in that way. And the last thing, and I think it really surrounds, you know, the entirety of who I am, is finding your community and making sure that, you know, you are ready to challenge those isolating days, right? The isolating dissertation, the courses, the difficult stats that maybe, you know, you're not an expert in like I wasn't. And having those people who are going to motivate you, whether that's your family, your siblings, your cousins, your partner, you know, non-academic people can be a really, really important community as well. And, you know, finding those resources on campus or online on social media as well.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. That's such a beautiful way to sort of round out not only this podcast series of inspired conversations, you know, Jennifer. So thank you so much for that. But also rounding out this idea that, you know, there is no right or wrong way to any of navigating these spaces in higher education. But at the end of the day, if you are true to yourself, true to your authenticity, true to where you come from, it's going to be challenging. There are going to be no's, there are going to be lows and highs, as you mentioned. But owning, you know, and celebrating your wins, right? Yeah. Knowing that they call it, you know, failing forward. We're all going to fail at a certain point. So, you know, for folks who are tuning in today, thank you for following me along this journey and my community that I've developed. Thanks to Jennifer, thanks to this world that, you know, we've navigated through, and, you know, saying hi to people on the elevator and connecting with admissions officers. I couldn't have asked for a better community of allies and advocates, but it doesn't end here, you know? So I encourage you, if you're listening to this podcast, how can they follow you, Jennifer? How can they follow your journey, support your community that you're building, so that we can all continue growing in this process?
Yeah, so Academic Latina on Instagram, and my email is also linked on there, and I'm always open to DMs and questions on email, and, you know, let's meet on Zoom. I have a question about grad school, so definitely reach out to me on social media.
Excellent. So again, the power of social media, y'all. Really make sure that your space and your voice, it resonates high and far in there, in those spaces. So with that said, unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you for the folks who tuned in or are going to tune in later. That rounds out the Inspired Conversation series, and I look forward to seeing everybody in season 2. Thank you all, and have a good rest of your night. I appreciate you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into this inspired conversation. where I interviewed an incredible changemaker in higher education. I'm your host, Andrea Cova-Bernal, and for a list of upcoming interviews, follow Inspired Conversations Pod on Instagram and click the link in my bio. If you are tuning in today and have questions about college applications, college success, or financial aid, you're not alone. I've been a college access and success counselor for many years, and I've got your back. Email me at counselorcova@gmail.com. Again, that's counselorcova@gmail.com. Remember, your success is our community's success, and you got this. I'll see you next time.